The second half of Invincible Season 2 is coming out in less than a month, so I can't think of a better time to finally do some Invincible minifigures, which is something I intended on doing for quite a while now. Unlike my normal minifigure videos, I'm actually going to do 3 characters at once here, them being Adam Eve, Omni-Man, and... Starting with Invincible, the face print wasn't too bad. I used Han Solo as a base just because I thought both his serious and smiling expressions worked well in terms of the mouth print, which was the only element I really needed to copy over from the base. I also tried to give his goggles some depth with a highlight and a shadow, because purely grey circles would look way too simple and plain. His torso print was definitely the hardest part of the figure just because it was the first time I tried to print like abs and pecs on a figure, so guessing the proportions was kind of tricky. I also wasn't sure how much detail to include in his abs, because on one hand leaving it plain with no allusion to them would look boring and potentially weird, but at the other end of the scale you have what Fortnite did with what I think are overly defined muscles to a degree never seen in the show. I tried to get somewhere in the middle with some shading for definition. His arm prints were extremely simple in that the hardest decision I need to make with them was whether to include the dark azure blue as a print on his shoulder or as a dual molded arm. I decided on it being a print purely because I wasn't able to shape the transition from blue to black in a way that I thought was accurate enough. And his legs were also super simple. All I needed to add was some detail for his knee pads and a line for his boots, and that was that. I moved on to Omni-Man's face next, and for this I thought I could use J. Jonah Jameson's face as a starting point because the expression was pretty close already, and there's the whole J.K. Simmons connection which just felt right. From there I just duplicated his eye, removed his mouth, reshaped his mustache, changed and added some creases for his expression, and changed the colour of his facial hair. And before I knew it I was looking at Omni-Man, which was pretty cool. For his torso print I used Invincible's torso as a starting point purely because I wasn't in the mood to redo the abs and pecs from scratch. From there I removed Invincible's costume design before adding Omni-Man's in its place. I intentionally used this starting point because I knew I could then just shift around and add muscle definition here and there, just to get across the idea that Omni-Man is so much stronger than him. Truthfully, his torso print didn't feel right in the moment, and never really did until the rest of the figure was completely done, but there was only so much I could do. Omni-Man's legs, similar to Invincible's, were pretty straightforward. I added some shadows for his knees and around his crotch to get some muscle definition in there, but there's nothing much to say beyond that, honestly. Same story with his arms. I added some printing for his gloves and added some shading to frame his muscles, and that was that. I then moved on to Adam Eve, and my god, she posed a lot more challenges than I expected. I used Princess Leia as a starting point for her face, and I immediately struggled to find any details to include to distinguish her from the base. I changed the eyes, the eyebrow shape, and the lip color before experimenting with moving her eyes slightly further apart, but I didn't really like how that looked, so I reverted it again. I tried giving her some green eyes, which isn't something I'd usually do for a character like this, but it felt like the only thing I could do to make her distinct. I then shrunk her mouth slightly and called it there. I really don't know what else I could have done with her, honestly. Like, at least with Omni-Man, he has a load of creases and a mustache to work with. Eve didn't really have anything. I then started on a torso print where I ran into another major issue in that I had no idea what colours to use. I tried vibrant coral for the darker part and light reddish violet for the rest, but that felt a little desaturated when looking at my references, so I tried the next closest colour I could find to that crimson pink with this bright purple, but that felt way too saturated to a point that it swung too hard in the opposite direction. Her design really exposed a gap in my colour palette, which was pretty annoying, but I eventually decided on the more desaturated colour scheme because I think it looked more accurate and felt better for a character. Her waist was as simple as they get, and her arms weren't too bad either. Similar to Invincible, I had to decide whether to use dual molded arms for her or not, and ultimately I decided not to for the same reasons as Invincible, namely that getting the shaping to look right was just not working out. Her leg prints had a bit more going on just because I needed to get some side and inside leg printing in there to get her shorts included, but even at that, the extent of the design was just a few mostly straight lines, so it really didn't take long. I posed all the characters next. Here's a before and after for Eve, here's Omni-Man, and here's Invincible. Then came the Photoshop adjustments, and for Eve especially, this was, again, pretty difficult. I used these 3 hair pieces to form her haircut because for some reason LEGO don't have a mold for her specific style, so the adjustment stage was just me overlaying all the renders and just mix and matching these hair pieces to try and Frankenstein together the look I wanted. It took a decent bit and I had to contend with a fair few shadow and cape issues, but I eventually figured it out before giving her that pink Adam spark of hers and shortening her cape. And with that, there's Adam Eve. I didn't love how she turned out at first glance, but when you see her side by side with this reference, I think it looks much better. Omni-Man's adjustments weren't that difficult, to be honest. It was just the case of mixing the 2 hair colors together to get his grey details in there. And with that, Omni-Man is finished, and he turned out to be my favourite of this bunch. Like, I really like how this figure turned out. And lastly, of course, there was Invincible, who I kind of just wanted to trim a little bit off his hair. I think the hairpiece I started with was fine, but taking that extra step and just cutting a bit off the sides really completed the look for me. And there's Invincible done. He turned out fine, I think. Like, there wasn't an awful lot I could screw up with his design. Like, it wasn't that complex at all, to be honest. And here they all are in a group picture. These designs were pretty fun just because they're a lot simpler than I'm used to, so it only took like a quarter of the time that it would normally take, which was lovely. In the future, I'm going to try branching out and doing more games, TV shows, and movie-related minifigures, probably in clumps of 3 characters just like this. My logic to separate this from the Apex or Valorant characters is that TV shows or even story-based games often have supporting roles or side characters that may not warrant an entire video by themselves, so this is kind of an excuse for me to get those done. Whereas in Valorant, for example, depending on who you're playing, the main character could be anybody, and there's no agent less relevant or deserving of a video than the others. If there's a show, game, or movie that you think would work for this that you would like to see, feel free to leave a comment with your suggestion. I'm open to all ideas, and even just gauging demand is really useful. But yeah, thanks for watching, and farewell.